Hey guys, it's Jordan again for video number 3 of my webinar series, and hopefully this one will prove to be very interesting. So sit down and buckle up because tonight we're going to talk about the occult. So throughout all of known history, humans have been wicked, depraved, violent, but none so much as in the 20th century. In the 20th century alone, we saw at the very outbreak of the 1900s, World War I and World War II, in which over 70 million people were killed brutally in 2 wars. That is more than in hundreds of years worth of history throughout any other point in known human timeline. So what could have made humans so incredible at perfecting the art of violence, at the extermination of innocent people? Modern psychology does not view things like demons to be a reality, and would just chalk it up to just human psychopathic behavior, and it throws out all possibility that there's any kind of spiritual warfare in play. So a little bit of background about me. My father is a minister. I was raised Assemblies of God growing up, and I'm still a Protestant Christian. I went to one of the largest flagship schools of that denomination, in which I studied psychology and biblical studies. I've had a very extensive biblical background and upbringing, but tonight I'm going to be bringing forth to bear some of the knowledge I've acquired elsewhere. I think that knowledge in and of itself is not evil. It is simply what you do with knowledge that determines the mindset and the spirit of the person. So as many of you know, I actually have been a stage magician since 2008. I've done all kinds of things that you could see on a TV show of an illusionist or sleight of hand artist. But knowing me, I'm a nerd, and so I have studied a lot of the origins of magic. I was in particularly curious, when did magic go from being something like sorcery, in which someone would be burned at the stake or beheaded for practicing, to what we know it as now, which is card tricks for kids' birthday parties and whatnot. So at some point through history, that mindset of performing magic absolutely changed. People stopped taking it seriously. And for good reason, because there is a difference of the two. There's a difference between visual artistry and things like sleight of hand versus things that dabble in dark arts or black magic, so to speak. Now, I don't actually believe that things like black magic can actually take an effect on you. I don't think people can cast spells, but that's just my personal opinion. There are people, though, that have dabbled very heavily in it, and they have become famous, powerful world leaders, and that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. So we're actually going to go into World War II a little bit, but before that, I need to take a step back and explain a little bit about what the occult is. So the word the occult, or occult, comes from the Greek word occultus, which means hidden. It is a synonym with the word arcane or esoteric, or esotericism. Both of those things mean just simply knowledge that is withheld from the general populace, set only to a select few for a specific purpose. From that, one can gather that things could be sinister, but that's not always the case. Sometimes secrets are beneficial. But we have throughout history things like the Eleusinian mysteries, the Babylonian mystery schools. Of course, you have the Egyptian religion, and a lot of things actually even before that. For example, Hermes Trismegistus, which is the name of a man who called himself 3 times as great as Hermes, the Greek messenger god. He has all of his philosophical and esoterical works compiled in a book called the Kibbalon, which was published in 1908. Now, not much is known about this man except for the fact that he did all of his arcane teachings long before the days of Moses, Abraham, Plato, and even Zoroaster. Zoroastrianism, of course, is the oldest religion in the world. There is a syncretic idea that all religion stems from one particular faith or deity. Kind of interesting, but that's a subject a little bit off what we're talking about tonight. So the occult is two different things, or more, depending on how you look at it. And it takes several different paths depending on which way you study. So you can go all the way into World War II, in which we're going to talk about, of course, Adolf Hitler, but also a man named Heinrich Himmler. Many of you will know his name, if you've studied history at all, as the architect of the Holocaust, which really did happen. I know there's people that believe the earth is flat and stuff like that, and also say the Holocaust wasn't real, but it did. It did actually happen, and it took the lives of over 6 to at least 8 million Jews, Christians, political activists, Freemasons, homosexuals, people with cancer, people with deformities or crippled limbs, anybody who is not deemed a perfect Aryan citizen. The Aryan mythology that the Germans conjured up, specifically Heinrich Himmler, was meant to create an Aryan super race based on Nordic mythology. And Heinrich Himmler was so obsessed with this concept of racial purity and whatnot that he orchestrated countless millions of deaths to purge his final solution into the world. He is the author of that concept and pitched it to Adolf Hitler, who was himself a noted Satanist and occultist, and absolutely loved the idea. Now, the thing is, Adolf Hitler, in his book Mein Kampf, displays a little bit of political genius and a little bit of almost psychotic fancy, I guess. You can be mesmerized by reading his book, but what captured and in some cases enslaved the minds of all of his followers was his great oration, his ability to speak probably much better than I do. I'm going to quote from one of his advisors, one of his top aides within the Nazi party. Now, Heinrich Himmler created the SS, the Staatstruppen. This man, though, is Hermann Rauschning, who wrote in the book Hitler Speaks a quote here in which he said, "One cannot help thinking of him, Hitler, as a medium. For most of the time, mediums are ordinary, insignificant people. Suddenly, they are endowed with what seems to be supernatural powers which sets them apart from the rest of humanity. The medium is possessed. Once the crisis has passed, they fall back again into mediocrity. It was in this way, beyond any doubt, that Hitler was possessed by forces outside of himself, almost demonical forces of which the individual man Hitler was only a temporary vehicle. The mixture of the banal and the supernatural created that insupportable duality of which power was conscious in his presence. It was like looking at a bizarre face of expression which seemed to reflect an unbalanced state of mind coupled with a disquieting impression of hidden powers." Hermann Rauschning was one of Hitler's closest advisors. For him to write that definitely displays that the inner circle within the Nazi Party had put forth value in studying basically what we would equate to be Satanism. In fact, Hitler sanctioned a group, a special forces group within the Nazi Party called the Abwehrnabwe, and their entire organization was founded on one ideology, which was to use dark magical powers, mysticism, to destroy their enemies, open portals to hell, and hopefully use demonic powers that they could control using things like the Seals of Solomon into destroying their enemies. This was really real. This is what we faced during World War II. Of course, Heinrich Himmler was the head of the Abwehrnabwe. So there's kind of some interesting background there into the Nazi Party, but it doesn't end there. You see, there's links from Nazism to many, many other things. We're going to talk about a man named Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley is the wickedest man who ever lived. That's his famous moniker that he's quoted for. Aleister Crowley was a famous occultist and alchemist who, despite his Quaker upbringing, decided that he was going to delve so far into the realm of magic that he has actually written most of the books on the subject. Aleister Crowley is the famous founder of the Thelema religion, in which their whole maxim is, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." The book of the law in Thelma is basically, if it feels good, do it. And they did. Crowley lived a life of prostitution, in which he gained almost every STD known to man. He was bisexual and engaged in ceremonial sex magic. The 99th degree, or 93rd degree rather, of the Ordo Templi Orientis, which he founded as secret society, involves things like the eating of cakes that are made of semen and feces and blood, all kinds of things. They ingest this and they partake in sex magic rituals, and it gives them great power to ask one. One of the most wicked and evil things that I can think of. And so the idea of ritualized sodomy is a really pretty disgusting notion. But that's what this man did and what he engaged in. He is actually linked, though, and got his concepts from the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Hermetic, of course, coming from the name Hermes, from which we actually just mentioned that name a little bit earlier here in the video. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn is a very famous secret society in which has stemmed all kinds of different offshoots. You have links into the Freemasons, you have links into the Rosicrucians, and all kinds of other groups that have taken some influence from this organization. But Aleister Crowley, though, took every single bit of it that he could and twisted it as wickedly as possible. But he was not a madman. He graduated from Trinity College in England and was actually very, very closely linked in with World War I and even into World War II. You see, he was the man who personally advised Germany to sink the Lusitania, thus bringing America into the World War I conflict. He also stated that when he was in the Agape Lodge of the Ordo Templi Orientis, that he actually really thought Hitler wasn't too bad of a chap and really hoped that he could convert him to his religion of Thelema. When he found out some of the more vile things that Hitler was doing, like, gassing millions of people, he then famously stated that he wanted nothing to do with Hitler and that Hitler was, quote, a black magician. Because Crowley's religion was pure or something like that. So, absolute whack job. Aleister Crowley, most evil occultist that has ever lived. And that's saying a lot, because you also have people like Eliphas Levi and Dion Fortune, and a couple others. I'm barely scratching the surface. There's tons and tons of literature on this stuff. But what's crazy is the links that this goes even further, because you have links to Crowley into England, into the royal family, the House of Windsor, who up until 1917 did not have the name of Windsor. You see, their name actually, I can't even pronounce it, I don't have it in front of me, unfortunately, is Germanic. They came from Germany, and Prince Philip has 4 sisters, all of whom were married to German princes who had Nazi sympathies during the war, and in fact one of them was married to the SS colonel who stood right underneath Heinrich Himmler during most of Hitler's speeches. So there's a direct link between the British royal family and the Nazis with Aleister Crowley, and all of this revolves around the occult. It's a small group, guys, and you're not in it. An example of that as well is Jack Parsons. Maybe some of you might know his name. Famous genius who was the founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the California Institute of Technology, Aerojet Engineering, and North American Aviation, and also a large stakeholder in Hughes Aircraft, as in Howard Hughes, the crazy aviist. Jack Parsons is basically the reason why NASA exists. Guess what Jack Parsons' religion was? Thelma. Guess what Jack Parsons' extracurricular activities involved? Well, he wasn't just a member of the Ordo Templi Orientis. At Aleister Crowley's behest, he actually replaced the head of the OTO and became its official acting head in the same lodge in which Aleister Crowley was himself a member, the Agape Lodge. He ended up being expelled from his own companies of Jet Propulsion Laboratories and Aerojet for all of his crazy and debaucherous lifestyle. But this man, of course, is commissioned, later on throughout the inception of the CIA, which happened right after World War II. And I've already covered in a previous video just some of the known projects that the CIA did that involved black magic. Things like, bear with me, let's see, Operation Midnight Climax, Operation MK Often, we had, of course, Operation MK Ultra, Operation Artichoke, Bluebird, all of those things that involved using black magic, psychics, mediums, and all of it with the intent and purpose of controlling minds, mostly for assassination. So this stuff all threads together. Once you start studying it, you see links and then the same names repeated over and over and over in their biographies. So this man eventually was kicked out of his own organizations by the major shareholders that didn't really want that reputation. What's really crazy is everybody knows everybody. Jack Parsons' ex-wife, because he cheated on his wife with her sister. So his ex-wife's sister ended up leaving him after the affair to go and hang out with the guy and eventually got married. His name was L. Ron Hubbard. Yep, he is the founder of the Scientology cult. L. Ron Hubbard and his ex-sister-in-law defrauded Jack Parsons of all of his life savings, and the man died crazy, broken, and penniless. Kind of like he deserved. That's what happens when you touch this stuff. When you get involved into, the routes of the left-hand path, as some might call it, or black magic, maybe you do gain some worldly power, but it's at the cost of your own life. You see, Satan doesn't give anything for free. And that's why I genuinely believe this wicked cabal that's taken over will eventually be going down. There's a lot of really righteous people that are very powerful that all wear tons and tons of military insignias and have 5 and 4 stars on their jackets, that are working very, very hard to dismantle this group. And it's absolutely fascinating. That's one of my upcoming videos. So to bring it a little bit closer to home on one of the last examples that I'm going to cover tonight, we have a man named William Clinton, who became president of the United States. Bill Clinton himself studied a whole lot of some really bizarre stuff way out in the left field. He started off when he was a child in the Order of Demolay, which is a wonderful organization. He did not continue in it because the morals that it teaches, not for him. So he took some of those concepts and, like the rest of this, quote, Illuminati cabal, has twisted those concepts. He was very, very interested in having seances. In fact, he and Hillary Clinton invited psychic Gene Houston to come and have a seance in the White House during his first term to try to summon the ghost of Eleanor Roosevelt. This was an article by the Washington Post. This isn't some fringe, weird, conspiracy theory webpage. This is Washington Post, guys. Psychic Gene Dixon, who famously predicted the JFK assassination, and it's easy to predict things if you actually have knowledge that the plot is being written out. But anyway, had several Oval Office seances with Richard Nixon. He loved having her over and doing seances in the White House. Richard Nixon himself provided lots and lots of astrological advice to Ronald Reagan. See, Ronald Reagan, nice guy, good guy, but he was a Hollywood actor. You don't get into Hollyweird without touching some of that stuff. So Ronald Reagan wasn't everything that everybody thought he was, but he was still 1,000 times better than the ones that came before and after him, including the Bushes. We already covered that Prescott Bush was a Nazi banker. So you see what I'm saying? It's all linking together, unfortunately quite nicely. You had Reverend George Bush as one of the first Bushes in Americas, in the 1800s. He did seances with Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, this is all satanic and occult black magic. So one of the things that I think is really fascinating, and you can look this up, fact check it, one of the first things that the Trumps did when they moved into the White House, they got rid of several little god figurines and statues, idols basically, that were gifts from foreign countries. Trump's spiritual advisory team, of which I have some, kind of second and third degree of separation ties to, went through the entire White House and prayed over everything and tried to essentially spiritually scrub some of the horrific things that have happened within that White House out. Trump is the most targeted for assassination president that has ever existed, and I believe that he is being protected because though he is an imperfect man, as we all are, he is in the seat of power for a reason, and that reason is to wipe this evil off the face of the earth. We're going to cover in later videos stuff like the Georgia Guidestones, some of the other conspiracies revolving the Bilderberg's agenda, and then what kinds of crimes have been committed by things like the Clinton Foundation and the Gates Foundation. I'm going to try to rip the lid off of all of this stuff, or at least give you enough information to have you seek it out yourself. So one of the things that I want to leave you guys with tonight is there's a whole realm of all of this spiritual and esoteric stuff. I read a 900-page book on alchemy and mysticism. It had intricate drawings and explanations of hidden symbols and things about, the Philosopher's Stone, the elixir of life, which is a primary concern of mysticism, is basically the prolonging and eventual immortality of your human soul. It's very much linked into things like Gnosticism and whatnot. So there's a whole realm of this stuff to study, and if you don't study it, you don't know what's happening. Ignorance can be just as dangerous as delving headfirst into studying theistic Satanism. So if you go into it with your mind prepared and your heart set correctly, you can gain knowledge that will actually help you and allow you to kind of study the waters safely. See, the thing is, I know who I serve, and who I serve is going to destroy this wicked filth from the planet. There is right now a huge political push for something so much far worse than the Holocaust, and I'm talking about abortion. We're going to touch into that too. So, like I said at the very beginning video, if you're triggered by things that the alt-left practically worships, this is not for you. Abortion has killed more people today than almost every single mass shooting in U.S. history combined. So the loss of human soul or loss of human life in the destruction of our collective soul is absolutely appalling. Hands which shed innocent blood is one of the number one things that God hates. And so I go into this subject here on the occult, Satanism, demonology, whatnot, not to try to frighten you, but to let you know that the world that you have seen a fabrication, and history has taught you lies. Go into it, study more, find other sources, glean together all of that information, weave it, and see what comes out. Separate the wheat from the chaff. Use logic, critical thinking, because if you don't, they will do your thinking for you. All that is just about everything that I think I need to say on the subject. If you guys have any questions, definitely feel free to private message me. I'm happy to reach out to you. I'm sure there's probably quite a few other things that I could have added. So if you guys have further discussion, please let me know. But this is a very wide and broad subject that can't just be painted with one brush. So there are people that are expert on this. I'm not one. I don't claim to be. But just to give you guys a little bit of understanding, so that way the next time you pick up a newspaper or happen to walk by CNN playing somewhere, you can start translating some of these events into what they really are. And once you peer behind that veil and you have the cloudiness come off of your eyes, you start seeing the world very differently. So to that point, I wish you all a wonderful night. God bless. Thank you so much for watching.